Hey, welcome to Spring Break. I am, of course, Scott Ford, your host for the series of live streams we're going to do this week. I've done live streams before, but I've never done them where we have them specifically scheduled. So like today, we're doing two different live streams. We are doing the one we're doing right now, which is installing and maintaining Linux and macOS. And then this is going to take about an hour and a half, fingers crossed. And then we're going to hop into command line. So the different command lines, commands that you need to know, both in the Windows world as well as the terminal commands that you need to know in Linux. I'm assuming that we're live streaming right now and everything seems to be working okay. So I see I already have some folks in chat. So welcome. Thank you for spending your spring break with me. And if you happen to miss it live, of course, this is being recorded and sent to YouTube. So welcome. We did a little bit of a pivot today. So the rest of the live streams for the rest of this week are going to start at, I believe, 6 o'clock, I think is the time that I have listed. That is, of course, Central Standard Time. And that goes from like 6 to 9 o'clock in the evening. Today, I had to do it a little bit earlier because I have a different, another obligation that I have to go to. I think it's about 6:30. So didn't want to not do this, but at the same time had something I could not miss. So with that out of the way, let's actually take a look at what we're doing here, which is installing and maintaining Linux and Mac OS. So let's get going here. So our objectives for this unit are describe Mac OS and navigate the interface, explain how to install and uninstall applications for Mac OS, list and describe best practices for working with Mac OS and Linux distros, navigate and explain the functions of common Mac OS system preferences, explain the functions of the more powerful Mac OS features, and navigate and define elements of Ubuntu's interface. So jumping into Mac OS, let me post something in the chat real fast, just to make sure we are doing what we're supposed to be doing here. So introducing our introduction to macOS. Okay, cool. So we are being broadcast live. Awesome. Just needed to double check that. You know, you get all the pieces in place, but you're still not sure if everything's working correctly. So normally I have a class with a couple of students in here who can say, yeah, we hear you, we see you, all that fun stuff. So taking a look at Mac OS, Apple's operating system designed to run on Apple's desktops and laptops. It was based off of a program called Unix. Unix is kind of the granddaddy of all operating systems. Now, I will tell you right now, that part right there, what it was based off of, sometimes shows up as an exam question. So know that, okay? So it was based off of Unix. Jump scare, haha, funny. It was initially released in 2001 and is considered closed source. Originally, Mac OS was known as Mac OS 10, then OS 10, but now it's known as Mac OS. Now, let me give you a warning here. Yesterday, we were at Panera Bread doing a little study session, and a review question popped up that showed OS 10 and not Mac OS. Keep in mind when test questions have been written for exams. So, for example, the current A+ exam's been out for about 3 years or so. So current developments now aren't going to be reflected on a test that was written 3, 4, 5 years ago. So you have to keep in mind the time frame of when the test was created. So, for example, with file systems, the current file system for Apple was APFS, Apple File System, but that might not be an answer choice on a test question. They might have HFS Plus. So just always keep in mind that tests don't always reflect the most current information simply because of when they were written. So, Mac OS, originally known as Mac OS 10 or OS 10, know those names as well. And Mac OS is the second most used operating system for desktops. Apple uses code names for the Mac OS versions. Now, you need to know kind of how some of the operating systems are named, specifically Mac OS, and as well as the Android applications, which we're not going to talk about right now. But Mac OS started naming their versions of their operating systems after big cats. Well, they ran out of big cats, and so they name them now after places in California. To find out what version you're running, simply click on the Apple menu. That's the top left little Apple icon, and click on About This Mac, and that will show you what you're running. Apple ID, if you've ever used Microsoft or Steam or Adobe or any other thing where you have to create an account and log into it, Apple ID is the same idea. This is Apple's account system, and it's called Apple ID. It's your account identifier for all Apple products and services, and you can use this on things like App Store, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, iCloud, and iMessage. I will add real fast, so you guys are aware of this. This presentation pretty much goes directly from the objectives on the CompTIA exam on the 1102 exam. So things that are mentioned, for example, Apple ID, different functions that we're going to talk about, these are directly from the exam as far as the exam objectives go. So these are things you need to know. So talking about the Mac OS interface. Now, the cool thing is that if you can navigate around Windows, you can navigate around Mac OS. They're very, very similar. It's kind of like renting a car. In my career, I've had to do a lot of car rentals over time where the steering wheel, right, is always in the same spot, but the blinker might be on the right side, might be on the left side. Cars out here in Houston, of course, don't come equipped with blinkers, but everywhere else they have blinkers. The gas pedal is always on the right side. The brake is always kind of to the left of that. You have a lot of similarities with some variations. And so when you're going from Windows to Mac OS, there are some slight changes. It's nothing major. You can figure it out. If you're familiar with one, you can kind of sort out the other one. So desktop. Just like in the Windows environment, this desktop is the place where you do your work. It's the background area on the computer where things are placed. Grabbing a little coffee in between here talking. This is the row on the bottom of the screen. This is called the dock. It contains icons of programs, files, and folders. By default, some programs are found there when you launch Windows or Mac OS for the very first time. The first time you buy a Mac computer, these things are going to be by default down in the dock, but it is very, very customizable. At the very top of your desktop in Mac OS, you have the menu. This is found along the top screen. And up here, you can find things like the Finder, the File, Edit, View, Go, Windows Help. And options are going to change depending on what you have open. So it's context sensitive. It knows what you have open and will adjust what's up there in the menu accordingly. To the right is the toolbar. This is found on the far right side of the menu. The toolbar is like the toolbar on the PC. In the Mac OS toolbar, you can find date and time as well as network information, search functions, and other things. To the far left, again, you have that Apple icon. This is the system menu. The system menu contains system-related functions. You click on that little Apple thing and you get all the information. Here you can find the options to turn off the computer, put the computer to sleep, access system preferences, and much more, as you can see in the graphic. On the bottom are icons. If you've used a PC, you're familiar with icons. Well, they're called icons here. Icons are graphical representations of applications, files, folders that you can open. This is why it's a graphic user interface. You can go and click on the icons and open them up that way. The Finder, that is on the bottom left-hand side. It's like the File Explorer in Windows. It is on the dock by default, and it's got those like two faces, kind of looking at each other or whatever Mac decided to do with that. But that's the Finder. And that, like I said, is like File Explorer in the PC world. So there it is. Happy little face there. Then we have Spotlight. Spotlight is the tool. This is the built-in search tool for Mac OS. So this is called Spotlight. You do need to know what it's called and what it do. It is the spyglass icon found on the top right side of the desktop. You can either click on it directly or you can use a keyboard shortcut as listed right there. Not only do you get to search the computer itself, but it also has search features that'll access online as well as the network. So you can search other computers on the network as well as online resources. This uses something called the Bonjour to discover networking attached devices. Bonjour is an Apple thing. that allows networking of that type to happen. Just like in the world of PC, we do have keyboard shortcuts. Mac OS has a whole bunch of different keyboard shortcuts, and if you missed it in the conversation about Windows, the purpose of shortcuts is to keep your hands on the keyboard. The more times you have to take your hands off the keyboard to, for example, manipulate the mouse, move the mouse around, it can actually slow you down. So the idea is that the more keyboard shortcuts you know, the more you can keep your hands on the keyboard and the faster your productivity, your typing, your access will be. Keyboards have the function key, control, option, and command key. These keys are also represented by these symbols. Now, I can tell you as a PC user, going to a Mac, this is one of the weirder things because the shortcuts have these different symbols, right? You have the command with that little weird looking thing. Shift makes sense. It's an up arrow. Option has that, again, that weird little thingamabob. So that, to me, in my personal opinion, this is just me talking, that is one of the weirder things about going from a PC to a Mac, is knowing what those little icons mean as far as the corresponding part on the keyboard. Now, if you look at the graphic here, some keyboards will give you a little hint on what those little icons are for. Some keyboard shortcuts to know is Command and X, just like in the Windows world, that will cut something, right? That'll select an item and copy it to the clipboard. I'm sorry, that's copy. It's cut. It's cut. Yeah. Hold on. Obviously, I need some more coffee. Let the caffeine kick in. All right, let's try this again. So Command and X, just like on the PC, is for cut, while Command and C is copy. Again, going from a PC to a Mac, it basically means you got to move your pinky kind of over a little bit. So if I'm working on the Mac quite a bit, the letters are still the same for these things as they are in a PC, but the command button versus a control button, it's just a matter of moving your pinky finger to a different location, and the muscle memory sometimes gets in the way. But otherwise, if you know a lot of shortcuts in one, they transfer over pretty well. Command and V does the paste. Command Z is the universal undo button. And Command A selects everything on the window. Command F finds items. Command S saves current documents, just like Control S does that. Command T opens a new tab. Option, Command, and Escape is force quit. We'll talk about force quit a little bit later on. And Command Tab is the work switch, right? So in the world of PC, Control Tab is your work switch that opens up all the different windows that you have open, while in Mac OS, Command Tab does the same thing. Okay, so that's the basics of the interface. Now let's take a look at installation and getting rid of applications. How do you uninstall them? So managing software. Apples are designed with ease of use in mind. In general, and Windows, to be fair, Windows has gotten a lot better of this over the years. But if I was to have somebody ask me, what kind of computer should I get? And they were not very computer savvy. Okay, they didn't want to mess with things in the back end. They really didn't want to worry about different computer aspects of having their computer work. I would typically drive them towards a Mac, because Apple computers are designed to be easy to use. Now, they're crazy expensive, don't get me wrong, compared to PCs. Macs get very expensive very fast. But for ease of use, Mac has traditionally been the easier of the computers to use. They're more user-friendly. Saying that, Windows 10, and I just got a Windows 11 computer, so the jury's still out as far as I'm concerned on ease of use. But Windows has gotten easier to use over the years. But Apple has always been designed with making life easier for the user. And again, they're paying a premium for that. So installing and removing programs is very user-friendly. Apple users can use the App Store to find, install, and update software. Remember that. They use the App Store. Users can still download third-party software directly from vendors. And there are a few file types that you should be aware of. These can be on the test. These three different types of programs, or I should say, it's different programs, can be on the test. In fact, CompTIA specifically lists these three to know about them. So pay attention. First, you have the DMG. This is a disk image. This is a mountable disk image file. It's used for the distribution of macOS software. And when you double click on it, it opens up the disk image mounter utility. Then you have the PKG, which is the installer file. This is packages of software and other files that can be installed on macOS and iOS devices. And finally, you have the app. This is the application bundle. Application bundle is designed to run on macOS systems. This is similar to an exe file that you find in Windows. Exe files are what you launch to run programs and often found within DMG packages. Removing programs from Mac is fairly simple compared to a PC. You can open up Launchpad or you can open up Finder. If you open up the Finder, you go to the application folder, and the application is the folder. You open it, you look for an uninstall option. If there's no uninstall option, you can either drag the application to the trash or select the application and go to File, select Move to Trash, then empty the trash. Now, let me explain here for a second. In a Mac, theoretically, you're able to just take the program and drop it into the trash. Now, longtime PC users, this still bugs me because in the world of a PC, in the world of Windows, if you just delete the program, bad things can happen. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I was working at Best Buy on the tech bench, and we had a little old lady come in who had deleted Norton antivirus, and she was having computer problems. And so when I asked her, I said, "What happened? What occurred to the computer to kind of make things weird? What happened before things started going weird?" And she said she deleted Norton antivirus. Huh? When you say deleted Norton's antivirus, what exactly do you mean deleted Norton? And she told me she went into the program file, saw the program Norton, and deleted it. Well, what happened is that in the Windows world, we have something called the registry. And when you install a program in Windows, it puts these tentacles, these little root systems all through your computer. And if you don't remove a program correctly through uninstall on a Windows computer, bad things can happen. Things can stay in the registry, things can cause crashing, things can cause all sorts of bad stuff. In a macOS world, there is no registry. You are able to delete a program by just moving it into the trash. By the way, recently at a boot camp, and I'm not naming any names, I had a student learn this lesson the hard way as well because he deleted a program without doing the uninstall. And if you're watching, you know who I'm talking about. So with Apple, you can just move it to the trash. However, there are third-party programs where it will find parts of it throughout the computer and remove it. I have personally had to go into libraries to remove bits and pieces of programs left behind by a macOS program. So they say you can just drag it to the trash and get rid of it, but get a third-party app just in case. Now, what's also cool is if you open Launchpad and you press and hold the Options key, you'll also get the icons to start to juggle. If there is an X next to the application, you can just click on the X and it will delete it just on its own. So I guess the take-home message here is deleting programs in macOS is a lot easier than deleting programs in Windows. So there you go. So let's talk about best practices for a second. Best practices are steps and processes that have been shown to be efficient and effective when it comes to working and maintaining operating systems, all operating systems. But we're going to talk about macOS specifically right now. These also, I might add, are directly from the CompTIA 1102 objectives. So we're going to take a look at backups, antivirus, and update and patches. So taking a look at backups. Backing up data or backing up date is important. Oh, I got to fix that. That's a little typo. Backing up data is important no matter what operating system is being used. So no matter what you're using, you should always make backups. Now, this has become less of an issue with cloud storage like Dropbox and things like that, but you should always make backups of your information. In previous lectures, when we were doing in-person, face-to-face boot camps, we talked about hard drives failing. They always fail. It's not a matter of if, it's always a matter of when. And so data can get lost. So it's always a good idea to back up. In the world of macOS, there are two primary ways to back up your data. There we go. I spelled it right there. So you have Time Machine and you have iCloud, which we'll talk about later on in this unit. Now, let me pause this for a second. I just mentioned something like Dropbox. The exam, right, the A+ exam specifically lists backing up using Time Machine and iCloud. So these are the ones you need to know about. Now, in reality, a Mac user could easily use Dropbox. I use Dropbox. I got a PC and I got a Mac at home. I use Dropbox to do backup. I don't necessarily use Time Machine. But on the exam, you need to know what they want you to know, in which case it is Time Machine and iCloud. So Time Machine was introduced back in 2007. We're going to touch on this again a little bit later on in this presentation. And it creates system backups called local snapshots. Backups can be saved to external drives or a network drive. Then we have antivirus. Now, I'm going to get some Apple people angry at me. So here we go. Are you ready? Apple people, you're going to get furious at me. Apple computers, Apple operating system is no more secure than Windows operating system. Did he just say that? Yes, I did. Apple operating systems is no more secure than Windows. The difference is who the bad guys go after. When we talk about security later on in this course, you're going to learn that a conservative estimate is that we think there's over 100,000 pieces of malware released per week. That wasn't an accident. I didn't misspeak. And I'm giving a low number. Over 100,000 new pieces of malware are released every week. And that's a small conservative guess. And those malwares are directed towards PC users, Windows users. Why? Because Windows runs the government. Windows runs the banks. Windows runs the corporations. Windows runs school districts. Windows is used in a lot of places that the bad guys want access to. And if you want to make, illegal money and you want to be, a big cybercrime circuit, you're not going to go after Apple users. Okay, so you saw the guy's screenplay. Good luck with that. So Apple and Mac both have vulnerabilities. They are both vulnerable to viruses. It's just that Windows gets hit more often and more things are developed for it because that's what's running the corporate, financial, government, everything world. Okay. So in case I get any hate mail, that's the reasoning. So, but Apple can be attacked. And so Apple has this thing called XProtect. And XProtect checks for known malicious code whenever an app is first launched. An app has been changed, and it also updates the signatures that are updated. So Mac does have antivirus stuff built in. Now, I will add this, and this is much more of a conversation for security later on in the course, which is a lot more security experts are saying by the time your antivirus, your anti-malware kicks in, it's already too late. Damage is already done. And here's something else to consider, which is anti-malware software doesn't always pick up everything. It has a certain percentage of bad things it can pick up, but there's also a percentage of bad things it doesn't catch. And so, again, now we're seeing more of behavioral needs to be changed to keep your computer from getting malware versus just relying on antivirus to save you. We'll look at that much later on in the course. So let's take a look at updates and patches. Even macOS needs an update because of bug fixes, security, vulnerabilities, and feature updates. Users can check the App Store for updates to their programs and the software update tools in macOS. This is a screen capture I took of my MacBook Pro that I haven't used actually in a few months. And you can see that it really needed to be updated. There needed to be an upgrade on the operating system. By the way, the cool thing about Macs is they don't charge you for these updates. So if you have, if you have Mac OS 10 or if you have Mac OS, it doesn't charge you, hey, there's a new version out. There's a new version of this. There's a new version of that. Something I think Windows kind of got the message on, because Windows 10 to 11, there was no charge for that. Traditionally, Microsoft would be like, oh yeah, pay us our money. we want our money. Mac OS just updates your operating system for free, which is pretty cool. So that is updates and patches. How are we doing so far? We doing pretty good? As he takes a sip of coffee off screen. All right, moving into system preferences. So system preferences is where the user can go to configure lots of their macOS settings. These system preferences are listed by the exam. So you need to know what each of these does. Now, let me clarify something as far as exam goes. They are not going to ask you to actually use any of these tools to make changes. So, for example, the first one is about displays. They're not going to ask you to actually go into a simulation of the operating system and make changes to displays. What they're going to ask you instead is, Larry needs to configure 2 monitors or whatever. What tool is he going to use? So that's kind of what we're talking about here. So you need to know about them, but you don't necessarily need to know how to execute, how to actually do the commands. And that's going to come important, especially in the next video that we do regarding command line, because there are going to be Linux commands that you don't need to know how to execute, but you do need to know what they're used for. Okay, so just a heads up as far as the test goes. So back to our regularly scheduled program. These are the ones you need to know. So taking a look at the first one, displays. This is where you can modify the look of the display, change the resolution, modify brightness and color schemes. Networks is where you go to make changes to your networks. Okay, so this is where you go to change your wired network, your wireless connections. You can configure TCP/IP settings. This is where they're at. You could probably guess what printers and scanners are used for. If you said configuring printers and scanners, you're absolutely right. Now, you might say, you know, the names tell us. Yeah, I know the names are descriptive, but you need to know what they're called in Mac, because they could put something that sounds like it would be the right answer, right? So printers and scanners does what? It configures your printers and scanners. So they might ask you a question, for example, you're in Mac OS, what tool would you use to configure a brand new printer? Would it be printers and scanners? Would it be install printers? Would it be printers and more? Would it be printers and you? You need to know what the name of the tool is in these different operating systems. Again, the names tell you, but if they tell you what they're supposed to do and then ask you the name of what does it, that's where they can get you. So just a heads up. I know it's kind of like, well, I know what printers and scanners does, right? Just know it. Then we have security and privacy. You can change password, configure the firewall, enable and disable location services. It's not Firewall. File Vault also lives here. File Vault allows Mac users the ability to encrypt data. We'll talk about that, I believe, again before we're done with this presentation. Accessibility. This allows the users to set up and configure options to make using the Mac easier for people with different disabilities or challenges. So, for example, if you're asked a question about text-to-speech, how does Sally turn text-to-speech on? It would be in this tool, it would be accessibility. So accessibility allows us to make changes to help people with different challenges use the computer just as well. And finally, here's Time Machine again. Time Machine is a backup tool for macOS, like we said a minute ago. It works with both local storage and network attached drives. So you can have an external drive. So for example, this bad boy out here. Still haven't used this thing yet. This is a 2 terabyte. This is insane. This is a 2 terabyte solid state drive, portable solid state drive. You could configure this for Time Machine and keep your backups all on this thing. So that's kind of cool. And of course, you can also do it on a network attached drive. So a NAS, for example. And you commonly use with external disk drives connected through either USB or Thunderbolt. And finally, it made its debut back in 2007. If you want to know more, by the way, about what Time Machine does, if you go to YouTube and search Time Machine commercial, there's a really cool commercial from back in the day when they did Apple versus PC. Hi, I'm an Apple. Hi, I'm a PC. That talks about what Time Machine does, which is pretty cool. All right, let's continue on taking a look at macOS features. So again, these are all from the objectives from the exam. Multiple desktops, this is where you get your work done within the operating system. You have open documents and programs on all your desktops. What could you do? Could you do different desktops? Could you change workspaces? Well, yes, you can. So one of the cool things that macOS introduced or has, and Linux has, and now I'm seeing it a lot more visible in Windows 11, is you can have multiple desktops. So for example, let's say you have a desktop set up for gaming, and then you don't want to close all that stuff out, but then you also want a desktop set up for work and productivity. You can have multiple desktops depending on what you're working on. And we configure this through Mission Control. So Mission Control manages your multiple desktops that you can have on a Mac. This application, like I said, allows the users to switch between multiple desktops. It also allows users to see all the open windows on the desktop of the Mac. And you can get there through different ways on the trackpad, on keyboards, through Magic Mouse, and dragging a window. Keychain access. Well before there were computers, we had keychains. Keychains kept all your keys together, and keys are used to open doors or open chests or open things, right? You have things that are locked. A keychain keeps the keys to open up those locked items. Well, in the world of macOS, a keychain is used to store passwords and account details. It can also store private keys and certificates, something we will explore in more detail in a different unit when we get to security. Then finally, we have iCloud. iCloud, we looked at it earlier when we talked about backup, but iCloud is something called software as a service. Now, we have a separate unit on virtualization and cloud computing that we'll look at. But for right now, know that software as a service you're familiar with it. If you've ever used Gmail, if you've ever used Dropbox, if you've ever used OneDrive, if you've ever used software that isn't on your computer, but it's cloud-based that you have to use a browser for, or you play an online game, this is what iCloud is. It's a software as a service. It's a storage area. It's a backup area where you can store things. Now, I will add this. Years ago, well, not that many years ago, about 7 or so years, but maybe it was about 7 years ago. I'm not going to Google it because I'm at school and I'll get in trouble. But about 7 years ago, there was this notorious leak of a whole bunch of celebrities' naughty pictures, and they found that it was because of a leak with iCloud. So all these folks were doing backups to iCloud that was intercepted. They were putting it in the wrong place. And so iCloud was or is an online storage center that folks can use. And you can probably guess why I'm not trying to Google search the exact date this happened. But it was a huge scandal, big mess, lot of lawsuits over it too. All right, speaking of nothing in particular, moving on actually to gestures, looking at a Magic Mouse. Looking at the chat, I don't know how to turn on donations. I'll have to take a look at that down the road because my coffee habit is expensive. So if you've ever used a smartphone, then you're familiar with gestures, right? Pinching, swiping, all this other stuff. Well, Apple has a mouse called the Magic Mouse. I personally had a Magic Mouse. I couldn't stand it. It was too light for me. But the Magic Mouse doesn't have any buttons on it. Instead, what it does is it allows you to do gestures. So if you see the animation, you can see this person just kind of swiping with their fingers to do things. It moves things around and all that other stuff. Again, personally, I like my weighted game mouses. Another thing that you need to be aware of on macOS is something called Remote Disk. Remote Disk is pretty cool, where you could have a laptop, and Apple really makes some insanely small laptops. The Apple Airs are just insane. They are incredibly small, or I should say incredibly thin and incredibly light. And when they first came out with them, they didn't have any CD drives. And this was a time when people used CDs quite a bit, or DVDs. They wanted to be able to use them. And so Apple was like, look, we have our beautiful MacBooks, right? We have our beautiful Apple MacBook Airs, and we're not going to change them for you. Okay, yeah, programs come on CDs. Yeah, movies come on DVDs. But what we're going to do is we're going to introduce something called remote disk. And if you have another Apple somewhere in your house, if you have an iMac, if you have a desktop Apple somewhere, then you can remotely control that CD drive, that DVD drive, that optical drive using remote disks. And so what wound up happening are these really small little laptops, these MacBook Airs, could now access a CD drive, a DVD drive off of a different computer. And again, the program's name was Remote Disk. File Vault, also something that the exam specifically mentions. Windows users have something called BitLocker. This is all about encryption, okay? So Windows has BitLocker, while Mac OS users have something called File Vault. This was introduced back in 2003, and this tool allows users to encrypt disk storage. Now, originally, when it was first released, people could only encrypt part of their drive. They couldn't encrypt the entire drive. They could encrypt parts of it, right? They could encrypt files and folders and all that other stuff. But what wound up happening is in an update and current versions of this, you can encrypt your entire drive, okay? And it uses something called AES, or Advanced Encryption Standard, 128-bit security. Now, I'll tell you right now, we're not talking about security, but AES 128 is big time security. That's a good, powerful security. That's a lot of powerful encryption right there. Now, I say that, maybe 3 years from now, 4 years from now, when AI really kicks in, maybe we'll be looking back at that and go, remember when 128-bit encryption was enough? Now we have to have, 1,000-bit encryption or whatever it would be. Ria, I'm going to have to try to figure out how to open up. I don't even know how to open up. We're going to have a break in between this lecture and the next live stream. I will take a look at how to open donations up. I'm not sure how that even works. So we'll see. I'll play that by ear for the next one. But thank you guys for recommending it. All right, in Windows, we have something called Control-Alt-Delete. This is known as the three-fingered salute, right? If the program freezes, you Control-Alt-Delete to hopefully close out the program. A little fun side story by that, Control-Alt-Delete was created as a backdoor by a programmer so he could get into different code without having to go through all sorts of goofy stuff. Windows made it famous because that's how you closed out faulty programs. Well, Apple users, yes, Apple users, it does have it where you sometimes have a program crash. You get the spinning beach ball of death where a program might die. And we use something called force quit. And doing this, you use the Option, Command, and Escape to get it to launch. I have had to use force quit more than once on different programs because, yes, things do break down. Okay. I slid this slide in. Let me kind of pop back to me talking to you all. Like I said, this is the first time I've done a live stream where I've had scheduled one back to back. And I'm looking at the time, and it's currently 2:40. And we started this, and I have it ending at 3:30. So 2 to 3 to 3:30 is when I have this particular unit done as far as scheduled for live stream. I'm going to continue on. Like we're still trying to figure this out. Like I said, I've never done 2 lessons back to back. So I'm going to continue on. And if we end this live stream earlier than I expected, that's fine. We will still come back for the regularly scheduled live stream that I have already set up. Okay, so let's continue on and moving on. So introduction to Linux. Let me pull back one here. All right, so let's take a look at Linux. I will add this, that there are commands that I have moved from this unit to the next unit, which is the next lecture we're going to present, because that's command line and terminal. So those have been moved over. This is just kind of an overview of Linux. So Linux is a family of open source operating systems based off of a Linux kernel. Linux is open source, and you have a ton, and I do mean a ton, of variations of Linuxes available. I mean, there are so many versions of Linux out there, so many different distributions, or as the cool kids call them, distros of Linux that are out there for you to kind of look around at if that's something that interests you. So some of the more popular distros are Ubuntu, which is what you're seeing right there on the graphic. You have Debian, Fedora, and Linux Mint. And this is by no means, and I mean, this is a little bitty list of current distros. If you want to find distros out there, you can just Google search. You can go online, Google, DuckDuckGo, Bing, and try to find different distros out there. And distros are actually made for different interests. So, for example, if you are a gamer, or you are in productivity, or you're a hacker, ethical hacker, white hat hacker, they have distros specifically for you. My two favorite distros are Ubuntu and Mint. Those are the two that I kind of gravitate towards. For teaching purposes, I use Ubuntu. That's just what I use. And apparently that's what all the other authors and trainers use as well. So, well, I'm not rocking the boat on that one. So back to, there we go. So installing Linux. So you can download Ubuntu. It's an easy download. It's a free download, which is pretty cool. And you can create something called an ISO. An ISO is what you need to do an install from. An ISO you can burn to a CD or DVD and use it. It's kind of like an ISO is almost like a freeze-dried kind of in storage, where you can burn it to a CD or a drive and use it from there. In the world of VirtualBox, which I love to use, this is what you're going to do. Now let me go and let me try to exit out of the whatchamacallit, man. Give me 1 second here. I'm trying to exit out of. Okay. And I'm going to pull over. I'm going to use my new Stream Deck. Ooh, this is cool. Got this at Micro Center. Let me go to monitor 2. There it is. Cool. I'm going to go to my websites and I'm going to click on Ubuntu. And of course it opened it up on the wrong one. Oop, give me a second. There we go. All right, so I've got Ubuntu open. This is Ubuntu for desktops. It is a free download. So this is a completely free download that you can download for free. Was that circular enough for everybody? And you can see they got different things, right? Ubuntu desktop, Ubuntu server. You can download it for iOS devices, IoT devices, all sorts of things. But if you click download Ubuntu desktop, you can actually download it. Now I have here a VirtualBox version of this. Let me start this up so you can see it. And I haven't actually installed it yet. This is the installed drive. Where are you hiding? You're over here. Let me pull you back over here. So what you're seeing here in real time, I'm actually doing this right now, is I'm running a program called VirtualBox. VirtualBox is a very cool free virtualization program. It's you can run all sorts of really cool things on here. And I can do different things, right? I can do test memory. I can do Ubuntu with safe graphics. I'm going to click on try or install Ubuntu. Yep. So now what we're seeing is the install. We're going to give it a second. For me, again, Ubuntu or Mint are kind of my go-tos. As far as teaching goes, I go with Ubuntu. But to be completely transparent, I am by far not a Linux expert. Although there are Linux certifications. I'll pull it up for you in just a second. It's always fun launching something for the first time when you're doing training, especially technology training, because something almost always goes wrong. So we're running it. We're seeing what happens. There we go. So we're seeing, like I said, we're seeing Ubuntu in VirtualBox. We're running it. This is the first time we've run this particular instance of it. And it's going to take a little bit longer because, you know, it's a virtual thing and I'm running all this other stuff right now. Come on. Oh, there's install Ubuntu. Let's see if this does anything. Okay, so I can do, it didn't. All right. So it is what it is on this one. What we're seeing here is, let's see if this does it. Yeah, I think let's actually install. Yeah, you know, we'll run it through. But by default, what we can do on this one is, pull back here. What we can do with Ubuntu is we can actually run it in a USB version, or we could run it in a to actually install it. And it looks like, yes, it did. Having a little fun here. So what wound up happening is trying to get to VirtualBox, the PowerPoint I was using just crashed. So that's always fun. Well, we're loading it up again. Come on. That is not the right one. Okay. Let's try. Where are you? There you are. One of the first rules of doing a technology training is whenever you're doing a technology training, something will always go wrong. So we're back here. Let me pull the screen back up. And switching over screens here. There we go. Hi again. All right, let's try this again. So you can download Ubuntu. That wasn't the problem. The problem was with the install and crashing my PowerPoint. So I'm not going to do that again. Lesson learned. So when you install it for the first time, you're given an option between try Ubuntu or install it. The try it allows you to run Ubuntu from RAM. So you might have a USB drive with it installed, or a DVD, and you're running it in memory. This is great because it doesn't actually make any changes to your hard drive. You can run it, you can try it out, see what's going on. If you want to install Ubuntu, then you obviously click on install and it takes you through the entire process. One of the cool things is also you can install a full version of it or a minimal version of it. Minimal is designed to run very light. Okay. And so why would you run it? Why would you run Ubuntu or any version of Linux off a USB drive or a media or optical media? Well, there's a couple of good reasons. One, you might need to do some troubleshooting. I've had situations where a computer wouldn't boot on its own. We thought the hard drive was bad and I need to test it. And so I would run a version of some Linux distro and run tools to check the hard drive. Or let's say the hard drive, you might think the computer's got all sorts of nasty little infections. It's been exposed to malware. I've run a Linux distro off a USB drive where the hard drive was never brought into the picture. So I could run an antivirus scan or anti-malware scan on the entire hard drive to see if I could find the malware and remove the malware. So those are things that you can actually do by running it off a USB drive. Also, privacy. Let's say, for example, that you are on a public computer. In my career, I've had to do a lot of travel. I had to do a lot of car rentals and spend a lot of time in hotels. Hotels have their business center where they have these computers that anybody in the hotel can use. These things are dangerous, to say the least. Sometimes they could be full of malware. I saw one computer in the business center that was just, it needed to be shot and put out of its misery. But I don't want to use those computers. I don't want them to get my information. And so you might be able to run off a USB drive, reboot the computer to the USB drive, avoid all of the nasty stuff on there, still get access to the computer's power, as well as a network, as well as a printer. So that might be one reason why you want to run a Linux distro off a USB drive. Now, this is a security issue. When we're running an operating system off of a USB drive, it's bypassing all the security settings they have on that individual workstation. So it is a good idea for a business to prevent me doing what I just said what I did in the hotel. So anyways, so let's take a look at the interface. Now keep in mind again that many different distros of Linux also mean different types of interfaces. We are going to take a look at the interface of Ubuntu. There are versions for desktop servers and IoT, Internet of Things, or Internet of Devices, or Internet of Things. I think I misspoke earlier. I think I said iOS or something like that. Anyways, IoT. So we're going to take a look at the interface. So this is the desktop, just like Windows, just like macOS. This is the desktop. This is the background area of the computer where things are placed. And the cool thing about Ubuntu and other distros of Linux is you can actually download and install different interfaces. So if you're not happy with what this looks like, you can change all of it. So kind of cool. To the left on this one is the dock. Just like on a Mac OS, you have the dock, which is where you find all your programs installed, or where you find different programs that are easy to get to. Again, you can add things to it, remove things from it, all that good stuff. You have something called All Applications, and this one, it's on the bottom. It's that waffle down there. And this is where you open the screen where you can find any application on the computer. You can do searches. You can also switch between active workspaces. You have a top menu. The top menu is the bar along the top of the screen. It shows active activities, clocks, and calendars, all sorts of stuff like that. Just talked about that. All right, best practices again for Linux are pretty much the best practices for everything else. First of all, backups. You got to make backups. Backup your information. With Linux, there are so many third-party things you can use. Who knows? Find one that works for you. There's also the cron statement that you can use to back up data on some versions of Linux. So be aware that a cron statement does exist. And we'll take a look at the commands in the next live stream in about 40 minutes or so. Anti-malware. Again, all computers, all operating systems need some sort of anti-malware detection and prevention and removal. With Linux, there are so many different distros of Linux that we're not even talking about what to use. I would suggest checking with the organization that released that distro as far as what they suggest. You can also do a Google search and find different anti-malware solutions for your Linux. Updates and patches, again, just like every other operating system, you need to update stuff. So you're going to patch your software, you're going to update it. Again, so many different distros of Linux. You're going to have to check with the developer for how they want you to update their stuff. And finally, this is something that you need to know, okay? This is called Samba or Samba. It is open source software. This allows communication with a Windows, Linux, or macOS system over a network. This allows the Linux system to communicate with Windows and other Linux systems. Let me repeat that, okay? Samba allows Linux systems to communicate with Windows and other Linux systems. It allows file sharing, print services between macOS, Linux, and Windows systems. Again, there's a reason why I'm harping on this one. Okay, this is directly mentioned on the I-1102 certification objectives. So you definitely need to know what program allows Linux computers to work on a network and talk to macOS and Windows. Okay, kind of an important tip there. So there you go. Know that one. Taking a look at OS utilities. Most people just want operating systems to work, right? We don't really want to mess with, even as computer people, sometimes you just want something to work, right? So let's say you want to play a video game. You don't want to have to go and configure stuff. You want to launch a game. You want the game to work. You just want to play the game. So most people just want things to work. Well, there are operating system utilities that we can use in Windows and macOS and Linux distros to tweak things and get things working correctly. So even with major improvements to operating systems, there are still things that we need to do. So every operating system comes with installed utilities and system tools. There are also third-party companies that develop and sell utilities that might be more powerful than what's built into your operating system. And we're not going to go into the utilities in too much detail. It's more so where you find them. So Apple is, again, going to make some Apple people angry here. Windows has to work on a whole bunch of different computers. I'm right now in my classroom, and I am working on a Nitro 17 laptop. Behind me is my teacher computer, which is an HP. I've got multiple HPs in this room. We're building computers in this classroom where we have all sorts of different parts, right? We have motherboards from, I can't remember who we got the motherboards from, ASRock. We've got something by Gigabyte. We've got video cards from somebody else. So we have a whole bunch of different equipment that's all put together. Windows has to work on all of those. Windows is a software company that makes things for hardware. Apple is a hardware company that makes programs to work on their computers. And so Apple has a very firm grasp on their operating systems and the computers that operating system is going to work on. Apple works on Apple. Now, there are people out there who create Hackintoshes where they will take a PC, do some configuration, do some code change, and get an Apple operating system, macOS, to work on a PC. When they do that and they share it, Apple usually comes by and says, no, stop that, or we're going to sue you. So Apple has the benefit of knowing what they're going to work on. So Apple computers are more stable and throw less errors at you simply because they control most, if not all, the variables. Windows and Linux, not so much, right? Windows and Linux have to work on a whole bunch of things. So macOS has these utilities, and not nearly as many utilities, in my opinion, as Windows does, because, again, Mac makes their own stuff. Apple makes their own stuff. So you click on the Launchpad, then click on the folder marked Other, and here are a bunch of the utilities. One utility I highly recommend knowing about is Disk Utility, because there is where you can control and check your disk and run all sorts of different diagnostics on it. Finally, Linux. Again, good luck. There's so many Linux distros that, there's so many out there that you're probably going to be getting third parties to get stuff done. But really quickly, if you click on Show Applications, at least in Ubuntu, you can find that there are some built-in utilities, and you're going to find built-in utilities in every version of every distro of Linux. I would imagine. I couldn't imagine any distro of Linux not having utilities built in. Okay, so that kind of wraps up. We did pretty good on time. It took about an hour to get through this presentation. That kind of gives me an idea of how long these take going on. I'm going to wrap it up in just a second. We will be back in about 30 minutes. I believe our next presentation on command line is supposed to start at 3:30, if I remember correctly. The time is also on the YouTube page, but we'll be back in 30 minutes. That gives me time to take a break, drink some more coffee, kind of get everything else ready for the next presentation. Find the donation button. Apparently that's a thing, so I'll be looking for that one. And we'll be back at 3:30 for the next presentation. Again, if you go to Mr. Ford's class on YouTube, there's a whole list of the live things that are going there. And I think that's pretty much it. So until 30 minutes from now, goodbye, and I'll see you soon. Good luck studying out there. See you in about 30 minutes, folks.